Psycho is a 1960s suspense horror film directed by Alfred Hitchcock from a screenplay by Joseph Stefano. It was adapted from a novel by Robert Bloch, which was inspired by the Ed Gein killings. Psycho's beginnings are born from real death, real murder, and put to the screen by the master of suspense. All the makings of a classic. Psycho is, at first, the story of Marion Crane. She and her lover, Sam, want to marry and start a life for themselves, but Sam is deeply in debt and trapped in alimony payments. Marion steals $40,000 from a wealthy man and flees town, hoping to use the money to help Sam get out of debt. She ends up at the Bates Motel where she meets Norman, a seemingly shy young man. Marion is murdered suddenly, prompting Sam and Marion's sister Lila to investigate her disappearance. It is revealed that Norman has murdered Marion, taking on the role of his own mother even after her death. He is diagnosed as having multiple personalities and is confined by the state. Beginning the film with the exact date, time, and location scrolling across the screen may come across as jarring, but there is a good reason for this. Film critic Stephen Whitty once explained, quote, "Psycho begins in pitiless sunlight, with titles informing us of the exact place, date, and time. A nod to the hyper-realistic crime dramas of the decade is also a necessary grounding. Everything will shift beneath our feet later, but right now, this is real. This is happening." Unquote. Hitchcock himself had a different view. Quote, "We even spelled out the day and the time, but I only did that to lead up to a very important fact, that it was 2:43 in the afternoon, and this is the only time the poor girl has to go to bed with her lover. It suggests that she spent her whole lunch hour with him." Unquote. Psycho spends a great deal of time trying to get the audience to sympathize with Marion Crane, in spite of the fact that she has made herself into a criminal only a few minutes into the picture. She steals from someone, but the man is obscenely wealthy, an admitted tax cheat, and believes he can, as he put it, buy happiness. She steals the money for a man in great debt, and because of this, we follow her along her journey, hoping she gets away with it, avoiding the police officer and every other suspicious character. Let's get into the technical details. Color and light play big roles in how Psycho is presented. Light and darkness. The first shot of the film is a sunny day in Phoenix, but the camera enters a dark hotel room. We see Marion's shadow first, before her, as she enters the office to steal the money. We see her shadow precede her again as she enters her bedroom. When she flees Phoenix with the money, it is suddenly dark. When she awakens on the next sunny morning, she is scared by a police officer with dark glasses. The idea is that darkness is following her everywhere. It creates a sense of dread for the audience without saying a word, and it foreshadows her eventual fate at the hands of Norman Bates. Darkness is everywhere, and the light is no real comfort. Instead, it is blinding, like when the window shades are opened in Sam and Marion's hotel room, the car headlights at night, and the neon sign of the Bates Motel.
What's that?
It's the light, the sign.
Color symbolism is a little more linear in a black and white film than in a color film, but we still get a lot of this from Psycho. In the beginning of the movie, Marion is wearing a white bra. She has dreams of marriage, of love for Sam, she does her job well, and although there are troubles in her life, they have not corrupted her yet. Soon after Marion decides to steal the money, her bra becomes black, symbolizing her descent into crime. Norman's outfit also follows a similar formula, although in this case, it is less about his move towards darkness, as it is about the audience's revelation that he is a murderer. When we first see him, he is wearing light clothes. After the murder, during the scene with Arbogast, he is wearing black. Later, when Sam and Lila meet him, he is wearing lighter clothes again. His clothes are not about good and evil the way Marion's are. His clothes are about exposure, about how he presents himself to the world. Marion, Sam, and Lila don't initially think of him as a suspect, but Arbogast sees right through him.
I think I've talked to you all I want to.
Yes, but
So,
just for...
I think it'd be much better if you left now. Thanks.
Speaking of morality symbolism, the shower serves as more than simply the film's most iconic scene. Marion has decided to go back to Phoenix with what is left of the money, to come clean, as it is said. When she turns on the shower, she is washing away her sins. She was becoming an innocent again. Norman Bates is a taxidermist, not by profession, but by hobby. Norman's pastime is significant, and not just because we learn that he's a murderer and that being around dead things would be second nature to him. There is more there.
It's a strange hobby. Curious.
Uncommon, too.
We first get a look at the stuffed birds when he invites Marion into his office, and then further into his parlor. The fact that he keeps suggesting where to eat, first her room, then the office, then the parlor, suggests that he always wanted her to eat in the parlor from the beginning, but wanted to lead her there. That gives us the impression that Norman is most comfortable around his dead animals than anything else in the Bates Motel. The parlor is filled with stuffed birds, some mounted on walls and some closer to eye level. We get a POV shot when Marion first enters the parlor, and the first two that she sees are an owl and a large black crow or raven, both mounted on the walls. Marion sits on the couch, right under the crow. Norman sits in a chair in the corner across from her, in front of the wall with the owl, and another large bird, possibly a hawk. Smaller birds are by the telephone and table. Let's look deeper into this. The owl and the hawk are predators. The crow or raven is both a predator and a scavenger. The songbirds are the prey. Norman tells Marion that she eats like a bird, meaning a smaller songbird, not a predator. The smaller stuffed birds might symbolize Norman's conflict with the idea that his mother, and perhaps all women to Norman, are better off dead. Norman even says of his mother, in his own words, that she is as harmless as a stuffed bird. Of these birds, Hitchcock once said, quote, "I was quite intrigued with them. They were like symbols. Obviously, Perkins is interested in taxidermy since he's filled his own mother with sawdust. But the owl, for instance, has another connotation. Owls belong to the night world. They are watchers, and this appeals to Perkins' masochism. He knows the birds, and he knows that they're watching him all the time." Unquote. Women being birds, or shown to have the same fate as birds, is shown again when Norman returns to the motel after his mother personality killed Marion. There are framed pictures of birds, and one gets knocked off the wall by Norman when he finds her body. Marion has been knocked off. All of this gives us insight into the mind of the psychopath. He sees his victims as prey, not crimes of passion or money or anything like that. Prey, death for the sake of instinctual need. Marion's death at the hands of Norman is heavily implied by the fact that her last name is that of a bird, Crane. There are other references to birds in the film too, Psycho being in Phoenix, Arizona, for example. Phoenix, a mythical bird, and it is Norman's mother, another so-called stuffed bird, who rises from the ashes to be born again within Norman. Also, the opening shot appears to be from a bird's eye view. At the risk of being vulgar, stuffing birds combines two British slang words, stuffing, meaning sex, and birds, meaning women. Norman, who is sexually attracted to Marion, wants to do just that, stuff a bird. It also refers to Norman's mother. There is a suggestion that Norman was unnaturally close to her, implying a possible incestual relationship. She, in the basement, is very much a stuffed bird in all the ways that could mean. Notable in this film is the frequent use of dramatic irony. Although the word ironic can have multiple meanings, verbal irony, situational irony, this type of irony is exclusive to story. Dramatic irony is created when an audience knows more about the events of the story than the characters, and can anticipate what is about to happen. If the audience does not know what is going to happen through dramatic irony on the first viewing, but can clearly see it on the second viewing, it can also be seen as a form of foreshadowing. In the first scene, Marion says, "Checking out time is 3:30, and when your time is up," let's think about that. Checking out time in a hotel. Marion will check out or die in a hotel. The police officer, seeing that Marion has slept in her car, says, "There are plenty of motels in this area. I mean, just to be safe," and then he trails off. What he meant at the time was that Marion should check into a motel, and that would be safer than sleeping in her car at the side of the road. What we, the audience, understand this to mean is twofold. First, Marion will obviously not be safe in a motel. Second, the police officer says, "I mean, just to be safe," after mentioning there are plenty of motels, meaning there are more than just one motel. Just to be safe, because you will need more than one murderous motel. You will need another one to be safe. When Marion tries to buy a used car and trade in her old one, the dealer jokes, "First customer is always trouble." He's playing with her a bit, but the dramatic irony here is that she will also be the first customer of the day at the Bates Motel, and it will lead to a lot of trouble. Marion, imagining what her friends and co-workers will say about her, thinks of someone saying, "I'll get it back, and if any of it's missing, I'll replace it with her fine soft flesh." This meaning is rather obvious. Later, Norman, trying to explain why her mother yelled at him a few minutes ago, says, "She isn't quite herself today." Well, yes, she isn't herself. She's Norman. Later still, an old lady in a store, speaking about insecticide, says, "Death should always be painless." It's as if Marion was simply a pest that needed exterminating. It's also a reference to the final scene.
I'm not even gonna swat that fly. They'll see and they'll know, and they'll say, why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.
Not everything needs to be spoken, though. In this scene, when Marion first sees the money, there is a painting of an old swamp behind her. That ends up being her final resting place, as Norman puts her in her car and pushes it into the swamp. The film features frequent use and repetition of mirrors. Throughout the film, we see characters look into mirrors, especially Marion Crane. There is a mirror in the scene in which Marion is packing her bags. Marion sees a mirror in the used car lot's restroom. Later, she looks in the rear-view mirror of her car. There is also a mirror as she checks into Bates Motel. Other characters see mirrors too. Arbogast does as he questions Norman about Marion's disappearance. Lila and Sam do as well when they check into the Bates Motel. Finally, Lila both sees and is frightened by mirrors in Mrs. Bates's bedroom. Repetition is a useful tool to clue the audience about the ideas that populate the film, as well as hint at events to come. So, what does all this mean? Well, what do mirrors bring to mind when we see them? A reflection of self, for one. That means that for Marion, she is forced to look at herself over and over again in the mirror after she has decided to steal the money. She must face the reality of the situation. Despite her good intentions about helping her boyfriend pay off his debts, she is now a different person than she was before. What else do mirrors conjure up in our minds? Duality. The notion of a second person, a second identity. At the end of Psycho, it is revealed that Norman Bates' mother is long dead, and that he has taken up the persona of mother through a case of dissociative identity disorder, commonly called multiple personality disorder. He is the other person in the mirror. He is duality. The use of mirrors throughout the film hints at the twist ending. It also should be noted that Norman is often just out of range of the mirror, like he does not want the audience to see his reflection. He walks in front of the camera, obscuring our view so that we can't see his reflection. All of this is deliberate. Also, note how the mirrors build towards a climax. The first few times we see them, it is only Marion looking into them. The next few times we see them, it is following her murder. The final time we see them, Lila screams in terror, not realizing what is behind her is only a reflection of another person. But in Psycho, a reflection, so to speak, of another person, the mother, is very much something to fear. The mirrors tell the whole story of Psycho. Next, let's examine Hitchcock's use of a common plot device, the MacGuffin. It's a goal or much sought after object that either the protagonist or both the protagonist and antagonist pursue. The MacGuffin is normally unimportant to the overall plot. It's just something that gives the character a reason to do what they're doing. But a story isn't about a Maltese Falcon or Holy Grail or $40,000 in an envelope. It's about characters. Of MacGuffins, Hitchcock has said, quote, "It might be a Scottish name taken from a story about two men on a train. One man says, 'What's that package up there in the baggage rack?' And the other answers, 'Oh, that's a MacGuffin.' The first one asks, 'What's a MacGuffin?' 'Well,' the other man says, 'it's an apparatus for trapping lions in the Scottish Highlands.' The first man says, 'But there are no lions in the Scottish Highlands.' And the other one answers, 'Well then, that's no MacGuffin.' So you see that a MacGuffin is actually nothing at all." Unquote. Hitchcock popularized both the use and the term. In Psycho, the MacGuffin is the money, but if one is asked what Psycho is about, almost nobody says money, partly because it is mostly forgotten halfway through the film, but also because we, as an audience, become far more focused on what happens to Marion Crane, the mysterious mother, and the unusual demeanor of Norman Bates as the film progresses. Without the MacGuffin, the story would have no driving point, because Marion would not have left Phoenix in a hurry, but this film is not about money at all. Let's move on to how sex relates to the film. In one of the most famous shots in Psycho, Norman Bates spies on Marion Crane through a hole in the wall, initially concealed by a picture. He stares at her in a state of undress, preparing to take a shower. This scene serves two purposes, the first being obvious and the second being subtle. First, it gives us a hint that something might not be quite right about Norman, and that his aw-shucks innocence and devotion to his mother may not be all there is to him. Second, it not only shows Norman to be a voyeur, but it also reminds us of the opening scene, as the camera pushes its way into the hotel room, making us the peeping Toms. The scene in which Norman is spying on Marion is not just about him, it's about us. We are meant to feel uncomfortable. We are meant to feel guilty. We are doing the same thing in the beginning of the film as he is doing now, and unless we are turning away during the hole-in-the-wall scene, we are doing it again. Psycho has been called the first psychoanalytical thriller. Let's investigate that claim and see what Psycho says about psychology. The film uses what is called the Oedipus complex, the idea that sons want to kill their fathers and sleep with their mothers. Norman's father is absent, having died without the audience ever seeing him, and his closeness to his mother suggests there may have been something unnatural going on between them. Norman even says, "A son is a poor substitute for a lover." Note that he does not say that a son is not a substitute for a lover, only a poor substitute. A poor substitute, but still a substitute.
Do you go out with friends?
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
Norman seems very familiar with the insides of an asylum. Marion suggests that maybe Norman's mother, thinking at the time that she is still alive, would benefit from being in an institution. Norman is appalled and talks about what they are like in great detail. How else would he have known unless he had been in one? Although never explicitly said, the film gives clues that Norman killed his father, spent time in a mental institution, and had a relationship with his mother until her untimely death. Although some of Freud's theories in the field of psychology are no longer the standard by which mental health professionals guide their work, this film was made over 50 years ago, and one should watch it through the eyes of someone in 1960. Whether Hitchcock wanted Psycho to be steeped in psychology or not is up for debate, but what is known is that screenwriter Joseph Stefano was in treatment during the time he adapted the story from the novel. It seems clear that he used his growing knowledge of the subject and incorporated bits and pieces into the film, including an explanation by a psychiatrist at the end of the film.
At times, he could be both personalities, carry on conversations. At other times, the mother half took over completely.
The three-storied house is meant to symbolize Freud's three aspects of the psyche: the ego, the superego, and the id. Norman carrying his mother, or his mother's personality, that is, to different parts of the house is meant to show that she moves about in his mind. Norman also shows signs of what were believed, at the time, to be homosexual traits. Wrong-headed ideas of the 50s and 60s about homosexual men coming from close relationships with their mothers, and harboring a hatred of women. That, combined with Norman dressing in women's clothes at the end, is meant to create a kind of gay panic for the audience that, at the time, did not discuss homosexual and transgender issues as openly as we do today. By modern standards, some of the film may even be insulting, but for its time, it was highly effective. Psycho is considered one of the greatest horror films of all time, and after looking at all the pieces of the puzzle, it's not hard to see why. Hi everyone, if you like what I do, please click on the orange Patreon link below. That's how this show happens. It's also the only way to request an episode. Also, there are other benefits to pledging, so check it out. The information is on my Patreon page. I'll see you next week.